Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a concept that sounds pretty intense, maybe even a bit intimidating. Friedrich Nietzsche's will to power, especially how he lays it out in Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Yeah, and it's one of those terms, isn't it? Will to power. You hear it, and maybe your mind immediately jumps to, like, aggression or dominance.
Exactly, like political power grabs or something.
Yeah, and that's a really common take, but it's something we want to clear up straight away. It's much more nuanced.
Absolutely. So our goal with this deep dive is really to unpack what Nietzsche actually meant. We want to explore the surprising layers to it.
And show how it might offer a different lens on, motivation and what drives us.
And we'll be sticking close to Nietzsche's own writing, trying to get an authentic feel for his ideas.
Okay, so to really get the will to power, we need a little context first about Nietzsche's general vibe, you could say.
Right. Where was he coming from?
Well, he looked at the traditional values of his time, heavily influenced by Christianity, of course, and he felt they were kind of undermining something vital in humanity.
Undermining. How so?
He thought they put too much emphasis on things like humility, pity, weakness, qualities that, in his view, actually suppressed our more life-affirming instincts. Strength, pride, power, these were seen negatively.
Okay, so he saw traditional morality as almost holding humanity back, like putting the brakes on.
That's a good way to put it. He argued that by sort of praising the virtues of the less powerful, these systems ended up creating a kind of weaker, maybe more resigned human being. He felt it stifled that fundamental drive we have to, grow, excel, overcome things.
I guess this connects to his famous idea of the Superman or the Ubermensch. That's his vision for the next stage of humanity.
Exactly, the Ubermensch. And yeah, it's crucial to remember this isn't about, like, comic book superpowers.
Right, no capes.
No capes. It's about an individual who has managed to move beyond those life-denying values we just talked about. Someone who achieves self-mastery, who creates their own values.
And slowly embraces life, warts and all.
Precisely. The good, the bad, the difficult. Someone who isn't constrained by that old morality.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, because you're saying the will to power is the key to understanding this Ubermensch.
It absolutely is.
So if it's not just about political power, what is it fundamentally?
At its absolute core, Nietzsche presents the will to power as this fundamental driving force within all living things. Think of it like an inner push.
A push towards what?
Towards growth, overcoming obstacles, becoming more capable, mastering oneself. It's the urge to expand, to exert strength, to realize potential. Nietzsche has this quote, "It's pretty stark, but central. All that proceeds from power is good. All that springs from weakness is bad."
Whoa. Okay. That sounds potentially problematic if you take it at face value.
It does. But it's critical to understand he's not talking about good and evil in the way we normally think about them, like moral judgments handed down from on high.
Ah, okay.
This is the guiding principle of the new system of valuing he's proposing. It's about what strengthens life versus what diminishes it.
So it's less about judging actions as sinful or virtuous and more about whether they come from a place of strength or a place of weakness.
Exactly. What enhances life, what affirms it, versus what stems from decline or resentment. And a really vital ingredient for accessing this will to power, for moving towards that Übermensch ideal, is something Nietzsche called great healthiness.
Great healthiness. Okay, that sounds good, but probably not just about hitting the gym.
Yeah, definitely not just that, although physical well-being can play a part. Think of it more like profound resilience, mental, physical, spiritual toughness.
Or like being robust.
Robust is a good word. It's the capacity to experience the full spectrum of human life, the highs, the lows, the challenges, and to not just endure them, but to potentially grow stronger from them, to confront difficulty head on, and, crucially, to create new values from that place of vitality.
So it's an active state, not just passive good health.
Very active. He even talks about argonauts of the ideal who are dangerously healthy. It suggests this isn't a safe, comfortable state. It's something you have to constantly acquire, maybe even sacrifice for, in the pursuit of knowledge and deeper experience.
Dangerously healthy. That implies risk-taking, maybe pushing boundaries.
Absolutely. It requires a certain boldness, a willingness to step outside the comfort zone physically and intellectually. You need this incredible resilience, he thinks, to really grapple with life and create something new.
Which sounds like the opposite of how he saw most people around him. He talks about the man of the present day, right?
He does, and he was often quite critical. He saw contemporary people as being perhaps too content with fairly small ambitions, maybe a bit too comfortable, a bit too settled, lacking that great healthiness.
Exactly. Exactly. That robust capacity for life, for striving, is what he felt was missing. Their will to power had maybe gone dormant or gotten channeled into trivial things.
So the man of the present day has sort of settled, opted for a smaller, safer existence.
That's certainly the critique. Nietzsche contrasts this with a different kind of spirit, one he describes as playing naively with traditional values.
Playing naively, what does that mean? Like being childish?
Not quite childish in a negative sense. Think of someone so overflowing with inner strength and vitality
Okay.
that they can approach even sacred cows, deeply held beliefs with a kind of lighthearted experimentation, almost like a child exploring toys, not necessarily to break them, but to understand them, to see what they can do from a place of abundance, not resentment.
So it's not cynical destruction, but more like creative freedom born from strength.
Precisely. And he acknowledges this might look inhuman if you're judging it by the old moral standards.
Yeah.
It really highlights how radical a shift in perspective he's calling for. That idea of playing with values is quite something. It suggests a real detachment.
It does, and it links directly into how Nietzsche thought values actually originate. For him, they aren't objective truths out there waiting to be discovered.
So they're not like laws of physics.
Not at all. He saw them as creations, things that individuals and whole societies make as expressions of their underlying will to power.
So our values reflect what we believe makes us stronger or enhances our particular way of life.
Exactly that. They are interpretations, perspectives that arise from a specific configuration of power, a specific way of wanting to shape the world and oneself. This is why he talks about the need for a transvaluation of all values.
Right, overturning the existing value system.
Yes, a fundamental reevaluation, moving away from what he saw as that life-denying morality towards one based on affirmation, strength, and this creative will to power.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, this transvaluation. Does he give any sense of how an individual might go through such a transformation? Is there a process?
He does, actually. He describes it poetically through Zarathustra, using the metaphor of the three metamorphoses of the spirit.
Ah, yes, the camel, the lion, and the child. I remember those.
That's it. They represent stages of spiritual development, if you like, on the path to self-overcoming.
Okay, so walk us through them. The camel comes first.
Yes, the camel. This represents the spirit that takes on burdens willingly. It kneels down, wants to be well laden. It's the stage of accepting the thou shalt, the rules, duties, and values imposed by tradition and society.
The dutiful stage,
Yeah.
carrying the weight of expectations.
Right. Learning the rules, absorbing the culture, then comes the lion.
Okay, that sounds like a shift in energy. Less passive.
Definitely. The lion represents the spirit that confronts those burdens, that confronts the great dragon, whose name is thou shalt. The lion wants to seize freedom, to say no to external commands and duties. It declares, I will.
So rebellion, assertion of self.
Exactly. It's about challenging authority, rejecting old values, and creating the freedom for new creation. The lion fights for its independence.
So first you carry the load, then you throw it off. What's the third stage? The child. That seems surprising after the fierce lion.
It does seem like a shift, doesn't it? But the child represents the final, perhaps highest stage. After the lion has cleared the space by saying no, the child represents innocence, a new beginning, forgetfulness, and importantly, playfulness and creation.
Playfulness again.
Yes. The child is a yes-sayer. It's capable of creating new values, of starting afresh, like a wheel rolling of his own accord. It embodies the creative power after the struggle for freedom. The will to power here is manifested as pure creative force.
That's actually quite hopeful, isn't it? It suggests that after all the struggle and rejection, there's this potential for joyful creation.
It really does. It points towards renewal. Now, you often hear the criticism that this will to power is just pure egoism, right? All about the self.
Yeah, that it's inherently selfish. Is that fair?
Well, Nietzsche certainly places the creating self at the center. He says it's the source of our esteeming, our despising, our joy, our woe, but its ultimate drive isn't just self-aggrandizement in a simple way.
How so?
He even argues that what we think of as our spirit or intellect is really just a tool, an instrument of the body and its underlying will. And the deepest desire of this self, this body will, is to create beyond itself.
Create beyond itself. Meaning.
Meaning to project its power outward, to shake the world, to impose its values, to leave a mark, to overcome its current limitations, and become something more. It's not just about hoarding power, but about expressing it creatively.
So there's an outward-facing creative impulse tied into it,
Yeah.
not purely internal.
Absolutely. And this perspective also informs his views on things like pity, which are, let's be honest, pretty controversial.
Yeah, he wasn't a big fan of pity, was he?
Not in the conventional sense. He sometimes saw pity as an expression of weakness, actually. A lack of will to power in the person feeling the pity, maybe even a subtle way of feeling superior to the pitied.
Okay, that's a challenging thought. How did he see it negatively impacting the person being pitied?
He worried it could actually weaken them further, that it could prevent them from confronting their own suffering, mobilizing their own resources, their own will to power to overcome their situation. He favored helping people become stronger, achieve self-mastery, rather than just alleviating immediate suffering.
Hence that quote, "I give no alms, I am not poor enough for that."
Exactly. It sounds harsh, but his point, I think, is that true assistance isn't just charity, it's about empowerment, fostering strength rather than dependence.
But isn't there a danger there of creating a really cold, uncaring world if you dismiss compassion like that? Where does social connection fit in?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And maybe a limitation of his focus. He's very focused on the individual's struggle for self-overcoming. He values strength, independence, perhaps sometimes at the expense of communal bonds. It's not necessarily about advocating cruelty, but more about seeing some forms of pity as counterproductive to growth for both parties.
It's complex. Now, another huge concept, the death of God. How does the will to power relate to that?
Okay, so the death of God, for Nietzsche, wasn't him celebrating atheism exactly, but more observing a cultural phenomenon.
Right, the decline of traditional religious belief and its authority in the modern world.
Exactly. The collapse of those absolute, divinely ordained foundations for morality and meaning. And in the void left by this death, the will to power becomes absolutely central.
Because if there's no God setting the rules,
then humanity has to create its own meaning, its own values. And the engine for that creation, according to Nietzsche, is the will to power. It's the internal drive that compels us to shape a world, to define what's valuable now that the old maps are gone.
which connects to his call to remain true to the earth.
Yes. Reject super earthly hopes. Find meaning and value here in this life through our own striving and creating. Don't wait for salvation from somewhere else.
It's interesting, though, because even without traditional religion, people still seem to look for external rules or meaning structures, don't they?
They absolutely do. And Nietzsche would argue that we need to become conscious creators of those structures ourselves, rather than passively accepting old ones or waiting for new ones to be handed down. The will to power is what fuels that active creation. And to really drive home this idea of affirming life in its entirety without those external guarantees, he introduced that famous thought experiment.
The eternal recurrence.
The eternal recurrence. The idea is, what if you had to live this exact life with every joy, every sorrow, every thought, every sigh over and over again, infinitely?
He supposedly had this thought hit him by a specific rock near Surrey in August 1881.
That's the story, yeah. It's presented as this ultimate test. Would you greet this news with despair, or could you affirm your life so completely that you would will its eternal return?
So if the thought horrifies you,
It might suggest you're not living authentically, not fully embracing your existence, not aligning with your own deepest will to power. You're living a life you wouldn't want repeated. It's a powerful, maybe terrifying way to evaluate things.
okay, so let's bring this back to the Superman, the Ubermensch.
Yeah.
Putting it all together now, who is this figure in relation to the will to power?
Right. It's crucial to reiterate, not a dictator, not a genetically superior being.
Got it.
The Superman is the individual who has stared into the abyss of meaninglessness, what Nietzsche called nihilism, often stemming from the death of God, and has overcome it.
Thou.
By fully activating and embracing their will to power, by undertaking that incredibly difficult task of the transvaluation of values, creating that own meaning, rooted in a profound, passionate yes to life, all of it. The suffering, the joy, everything.
And the opposite pole to this is the last man. Zarathustra seems pretty dismayed by him.
Oh, absolutely dismayed. The last man is everything the Ubermensch is not. He represents the ultimate mediocrity, the end point of just seeking comfort, safety, and trivial pleasures.
No great dreams, no striving.
None. They've invented happiness, as Zarathustra says sarcastically. They blink, content in their smallness, unable to even understand longing or ambition anymore. They've essentially given up on the potential and the challenge of life.
And Zarathustra finds the crowd actually wants to become this last man.
Yes, and it fills him with sadness and alienation. He sees it as a profound danger, this collective desire to level everything down to the smallest, most comfortable denominator. The will to power is fundamentally what's missing or extinguished in the last man.
So that drive to overcome, to grow, is the key differentiator.
Precisely. And Nietzsche even suggests that sometimes seemingly negative feelings can stem from this will to power,
Like what?
like contempt or even loathing. Sometimes these feelings aren't just negativity, but can be a sign of the will to power reacting against perceived weakness or stagnation. They can be the fuel that pushes someone to overcome what they despise, either in themselves or in the world, and to strive for something higher, something stronger.
So even disgust can be a motivator for creation.
Potentially, yes. He talks about feeling weary when even the rabble seems spiritual, suggesting a frustration with a perceived lack of that raw, vital energy he values. It's definitely not about just being nice or agreeable all the time.
It's a very complex picture of human motivation. What about society's role in all this? The herd, as he sometimes called it.
Yeah, he was generally quite critical of herd morality and the influence of the masses, and particularly critical of the state.
He called it the coldest of all cold monsters, didn't he?
He did. He often saw the state and mass society in general as forces that tend to stifle individuality, creativity, and the kind of radical value creation he envisioned. Conformity, obedience, these are valued by the state, but they can crush the individual will to power.
So the drive towards becoming an Ubermensch often puts the individual at odds with society.
Very often, yes. Because creating genuinely new values, breaking old tables, almost by definition means going against the grain, challenging the status quo, resisting the pull of the herd. Forging your own path requires that kind of strength.
Okay, so let's try and sort of wrap up the core idea here. The will to power, in Nietzsche's view, it's not really about dominating other people, is it?
Not primarily, no. It's much more about an internal process. It's this fundamental, inherent drive within us.
A drive for what?
For self-overcoming, for growth, for increasing our own strength and capabilities, for creativity, and ultimately for affirming life, saying yes to existence by creating our own values, not just accepting inherited ones.
So internal mastery over external domination.
That's a good summary. It's about realizing our fullest potential driven by this inner force. It's a move beyond simply following rules.
Well, this has been really fascinating. Definitely a deep dive into a concept that's easy to get wrong.
It really shifts your perspective on motivation, doesn't it?
It does. It gives you a lot to chew on regarding, what drives you personally, what makes life feel meaningful. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about those areas in your own life where you feel that strong pull, that urge to grow, to push past limitations, to overcome something challenging. How might viewing that through the lens of Nietzsche's will to power change how you understand it?
And maybe ask yourself, what old tables of values, inherited ideas about good and bad might be worth examining, perhaps even questioning or breaking?
It's definitely provocative stuff.
Absolutely. And if this has piqued your interest, we really do encourage you to pick up The Spoke Zarathustra or some of Nietzsche's other works. They're challenging, for sure, but incredibly rewarding.
Full of ideas to fuel your own deep dives. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Catch you next time.